In the waning days of World War II, countless operations vanished beneath the rubble of collapsing cities, hidden in forests, or buried under layers of bureaucracy and secrecy. Among the tens of thousands of documented missions, some files were deliberately erased, key officers disappeared without trace, and experimental technology quietly shifted hands between intelligence agencies. From encrypted U-boat transmissions in the Barents Sea to lost biological research in Wiltshire, the aftermath of global conflict left a trail of unanswered questions. This is a journey into the suppressed archives, the overlooked dispatches, and the shadow operations that history almost forgot, revealing the thin line between survival, science, and secrecy. Chapter 1: Operation Eclipse, the Vanished Convoy. In early April 1945, as Soviet forces encircled Vienna and the Luftwaffe scrambled its remaining sorties, a German convoy departed from the outskirts of Linz, moving east through the Alpine valleys near Steyr. The operation was recorded in fragmentary SS logs under the codename Operation Eclipse. Its purpose was to evacuate select personnel from the Ahnenerbe, the SS research institute responsible for both pseudo-scientific experiments and classified technological programs, along with a consignment of stolen Allied weapon prototypes. The convoy consisted of 22 vehicles, including 2 SDKFs, 251 half-tracks, 5 Panzer IV chassis retrofitted for cargo, and 3 unmarked Opel trucks. Each vehicle carried encrypted containers labeled as Archivgut, archive goods. Orders specified that no external personnel were to witness the transport under penalty of execution. Eyewitness accounts from local Austrian villagers indicate unusual activity on the night of April 12th, with headlights cutting through snow-laden forests and distant explosions echoing from the valley floor. Soviet reconnaissance planes captured intermittent smoke columns, yet German signals indicated complete radio silence after 2,300 hours. Subsequent intelligence reports from the OSS, declassified decades later, refer cryptically to a sealed valley and a sudden cessation of convoy tracking. The cargo itself has been a point of speculation among historians. Surviving Ahnenerbe personnel interrogations reveal references to prototype flight units and microfilm archives of Peenemünde designs. Peenemünde, the site of Germany's V2 rocket program, had been overrun by Allied forces months earlier, but these microfilms suggested that critical blueprints and experimental reports had been extracted before the fall. Allied technical intelligence teams, including the British T-Force units, attempted to trace these assets, but found the valley impassable due to snowdrifts and reported minefields. According to OSS memoranda from 1947, a joint Anglo-Soviet survey attempted to reconstruct the convoy's trajectory. Ground teams discovered flattened snow trails, partially destroyed vehicles, and burned cargo crates. Soviet unit diaries, specifically the 7th Guards Mechanized Corps, mention wreckage that included partially melted metal containers with contents unidentifiable due to extreme heat exposure. Notably, human remains were absent from the immediate area, leading analysts to theorize that personnel had either evacuated prior to destruction or been removed entirely. Subsequent reports from 1948 refer to a covert agreement between the United States and Soviet Union to leave the valley undisturbed. A single OSS cable, later declassified, states, "Eclipse black, do not attempt excavation, sensitive material, clearance required." The implications were clear. The convoy had carried assets considered too sensitive for standard recovery. Interviews with surviving OSS operatives suggest these included both captured Nazi technology and intelligence files detailing clandestine Axis operations in neutral countries. Satellite imagery collected in the 1960s revealed unusual ground. Depressions inconsistent with conventional bomb craters, aligning with historical eyewitness reports of explosions. Attempts to investigate were hampered by the Cold War's political tensions, and the site was declared restricted. Veterans of Austrian mountain units recounted hidden tunnels and makeshift bunkers, some containing scorched equipment and cryptic coded journals. Many of these accounts were only recorded informally due to fears of reprisal and classified information breaches. Cross-referencing Soviet intelligence documents, there is mention of an artifact retrieval task force operating in the area from April to July 1945, though no official records exist beyond 1950. In these redacted files, the convoy is described as carrying items of significant strategic interest, including engineered alloys and components for aerial propulsion, experiments, Analysts surmise these could be precursors to post-war rocket and jet programs, highlighting the continuity between wartime research and early Cold War military development post-war. Interviews with Allied intelligence officers suggest that the US and UK had independently attempted to locate the convoy but were forestalled by a combination of terrain, weather, and Soviet denial of access. A 1952 memorandum from the Pentagon references a missing convoy with high-value scientific cargo that may contain elements of strategic importance for both aerospace and cryptography. Documents hint that some of these materials could have informed early American and Soviet rocketry projects, though evidence is circumstantial due to redactions. Local folklore in the region also reflects the convoy's disappearance. Villagers spoke of ghost tracks in the snow, abandoned vehicles that reappeared only to vanish, and faint radio signals emanating from buried containers. Austrian historians investigating the files in the 1970s encountered deliberate erasures in local archives, and surviving Wehrmacht field reports often contain margin notes indicating materials classified for destruction. These notes suggest internal awareness of the convoy's significance, yet no post-war reconstruction attempts were officially sanctioned. Operation Eclipse remains an unresolved case within Cold War intelligence studies. While fragments of the convoy were documented, no surviving cargo definitively linked to the operation has been recovered. Researchers continue to rely on intersecting declassified OSS, MI6, and Soviet military reports, cross-referencing eyewitness testimony, terrain analysis, and declassified photographs. Each layer of documentation hints at a larger network of suppressed missions, secret technology, and deliberate obfuscation designed to erase the traces of one of the war's final clandestine operations. The story of the vanished convoy encapsulates the murky intersection of science, military necessity, and secrecy in the war's final chaotic months, leaving historians with tantalizing fragments and enduring questions that remain unresolved to this day. Chapter 2: The Murmansk Signal Intercept. In January 1946, British naval intelligence first detected a series of unusual shortwave transmissions originating from the Barents Sea near the port of Murmansk. The signal was brief, irregular, and transmitted on frequencies previously assigned to Kriegsmarine U-boat communications, specifically those used by the now sunken Type 7th Sea submarines. MI6 analysts noted the cipher was a variant of the Enigma code, though modified in a way not consistent with known Wehrmacht encryption practices. These anomalies prompted the creation of a classified investigation, codenamed the Murmansk Signal, a program designed to identify the source, assess the content, and determine whether the transmissions were remnants of leftover Axis operations or the start of a post-war intelligence effort. Field reports from January 12th indicate that Soviet salvage teams were conducting operations near the wreck of U-377, which had been scuttled off the Kola Peninsula in 1945. Soviet Navy logs, partially declassified in the 1990s, reference the removal of sensitive containers and the presence of unregistered divers under strict orders. British reconnaissance detected unusual lights beneath the ice, along with intermittent sonar activity that did not correspond to standard naval operations. The Royal Navy dispatched HMS Tern, a coastal trawler repurposed for hydrographic and intelligence gathering, to investigate. The vessel radioed routine updates until January 15th, when all communication ceased. Survivors later found adrift in the Kara Sea reported severe burns, disorientation, and an inability to recall certain events, suggesting exposure to radiation or other experimental hazards. Analysis of recovered logs revealed a previously unknown operation, Operation Sea Lantern, designed to monitor and potentially capture surviving Axis technical assets in the Arctic. Intelligence reports mention electromagnetic anomalies and active codex transmissions, with speculation that U-377 had been retrofitted with early experimental radio technologies developed by the Kriegsmarine in collaboration with scientists, formerly assigned to Peenemünde. These experiments allegedly involved long-range directional signaling, intended to bypass conventional interception methods. Declassified MI6 correspondence indicates that the transmissions may have included coded directives to remnants of German naval intelligence, which had allegedly established a covert post-war network along the Norwegian and Soviet coasts. The cryptography of the signal was complex. Bletchley Park documents describe the cipher as a hybrid of pre-war naval Enigma rotors combined with a polyalphabetic scheme not previously documented. Attempts to decode partial transmissions revealed references to locations, numeric codes resembling logistical coordinates, and recurring key phrases such as Delta Corridor and Unit 47. Analysts speculated these referred to hidden stashes of technology, possibly including surviving V2 guidance components, microfilm documentation, or experimental naval equipment. The logs also mentioned personnel, identifiers matching missing Kriegsmarine officers, whose fates had been officially recorded as casualties in the North Sea in late 1944. Concurrent US intelligence reports, shared under early Anglo-American cooperative agreements, suggest that the CIA's predecessor organization, the OSS, had dispatched operatives to monitor potential Soviet handling of recovered equipment. This underscores the complexity of the early Cold War environment, in which former Allied and Axis territories became zones of competing intelligence operations. A 1947 internal cable notes that Soviet retrieval is confirmed. All interception attempts must remain covert, implying a tacit understanding to avoid direct confrontation over sensitive findings. This coordination was likely motivated by fear that the experimental technologies could destabilize the post-war balance of power, especially in aerospace and naval weaponry. Eyewitness accounts from Russian dockworkers in Murmansk and Severomorsk describe unexplained naval convoys, unmarked icebreakers, and heavily armed divers operating beneath the polar ice. According to these testimonies, several crates were removed from U-377 prior to the arrival of British intelligence teams, and unusual radiation readings were recorded in nearby waters. Archive photographs, some blurred and intentionally overexposed, show metallic objects protruding from ice-covered wreckage. While analysts have debated their origin, documents suggest they were likely components of propulsion or navigation systems unknown to Allied navies at the time. The broader context of the Murmansk signal highlights the post-war scramble to secure, conceal, and exploit remaining German military assets. Classified correspondence between MI6 and the Foreign Office notes concerns about the potential Soviet exploitation of experimental technology, particularly in naval guidance and communications. There is evidence that some transmissions continued sporadically until 1948, though their origin and purpose remained officially unresolved. Analysts have theorized that these signals may have guided the recovery of hidden caches along the Barents Sea coast, or even served as a mechanism for communication with Axis sympathizers operating in Scandinavia. Further complicating the matter, US Air Force reconnaissance flights conducted in the late 1940s observed heat anomalies and unusual electromagnetic interference in areas corresponding to the Murmansk signal's coordinates. Internal memos suggest preliminary consideration of deploying specialized intelligence teams to intercept the source directly, though diplomatic constraints with the Soviet Union rendered the operation impossible. Additionally, post-war Soviet naval training manuals contain cryptic references to under-ice recovery operations and unregistered experimental subs, implying that U-377 and its modifications may have been repurposed for secretive research well into the 1950s. Despite partial declassification, key elements of Operation Sea Lantern remain shrouded in mystery. Intelligence reports, survivor interviews, and technical memos collectively indicate that the Murmansk signal was not merely a residual artifact of war, but part of a deliberate post-war experiment involving technology, human assets, and potentially hazardous materials. The disappearance of HMS Tern's crew, coupled with radiation anomalies, suggests a level of operational risk that exceeded standard intelligence procedures. Modern analysts have attempted to reconcile these events with known Arctic deployments, yet gaps remain, leaving the Murmansk signal as one of the most perplexing and haunting mysteries of early Cold War intelligence history. Chapter 3: Ghosts of Porton Down. By the early months of 1952, Britain's Porton Down facility had expanded far beyond its wartime chemical testing role. Hidden behind the innocuous signboards indicating agricultural and veterinary experiments, a new division known internally as Project Mallard was quietly operational. Declassified Ministry of Defense memos reveal that the project focused on biological agents with neurological impact, drawing heavily on data gathered from former Axis researchers brought to Britain under Operation Surgeon. These scientists, primarily from the former Reich's chemical and medical divisions, were integrated into a British command structure but retained access to highly classified research originally conducted near Krakow, Dresden, and Leipzig. Field notes from Wiltshire. Villagers indicate unusual activity surrounding the site in 1952 and 1953. Night convoys of unmarked trucks traversed narrow country lanes, and livestock vanished under unexplained circumstances. Residents reported low-frequency hums and intermittent flashes from laboratory windows, though these accounts were dismissed officially as industrial lighting anomalies. Internal Porton-Down logs, however, corroborate clandestine transport of biological samples between adjacent facilities. During a containment breach on March 19, 1953, multiple personnel suffered acute neurological symptoms, including tremors, disorientation, and short-term amnesia. Ministry documentation classified the incident as an ammonia spill, though internal memos reveal a designation of strain H47, a pathogenic agent derived from incomplete Wehrmacht neurological experiments conducted on prisoners in Eastern Europe. The integration of X-axis scientists presented operational security challenges. Personnel records from 1953 show that several senior researchers had prior affiliations with the Waffen-SS medical divisions. Clearance reports indicate that British intelligence closely monitored these individuals, noting behavioral anomalies and reluctance to comply with standard biosecurity protocols. Despite these precautions, gaps in daily logs, spanning 23 days in April, remain redacted under the Official Secrets Act. Analysts suspect this period involved high-risk experimentation, possibly involving live test subjects, though explicit documentation is absent. Archival photographs, partially declassified in 1999, reveal laboratories with reinforced containment chambers, sealed airlocks, and specialized decontamination corridors. Instrumentation includes early centrifuge models, spectrophotometers adapted for pathogen identification, and mechanical aerosolization systems. Field notebooks, penned in German and translated under intelligence supervision, reference testing neurological agents on both mammalian and avian subjects, with the stated goal of developing control protocols for hostile deployment scenarios. These notebooks also note discrepancies between expected outcomes and observed behavioral responses, hinting at unknown variables in the transferred axis research. Government correspondence during the early 1950s highlights the strategic implications of Project Mallard. A March 1954 memo to the Cabinet Office describes a contingency for rapid deployment of experimental strains against potential Eastern Bloc aggression, suggesting military applications beyond defensive research. While the precise content of the strains remains heavily redacted, surviving cross-references in KGB defectors' interrogations indicate that similar programs were being mirrored in the USSR, reinforcing the geopolitical importance of Porton-Down's secretive work. Medical logs, partially accessible through post-1990 Freedom of Information requests, list unusual patterns of illness among Porton-Down personnel between 1952 and 1955. Symptoms included delayed onset neuropathy, hallucinations, and acute respiratory distress. In some cases, documentation abruptly ends, replaced with generic notations of medical reassignment or transfer to secure facility. Anecdotal interviews with retired staff hint at cover-up procedures, including destruction of samples and erasure of experiment data. Local police reports, while sparse, corroborate missing persons and unexplained vehicle movements, suggesting that Project Mallard operated with minimal external oversight. Cross-referencing surviving MI5 reports, Project Mallard personnel also engaged in collaboration with NATO's newly established scientific advisory group. Declassified communications describe a series of joint trials in secure environments, involving isolated chambers constructed for bioaerosol dispersal and behavioral observation. British analysts frequently emphasized containment and civilian safety, but the pressure to reverse engineer captured Axis research often overrode standard protocols. Internal memos indicate that some test results were intentionally falsified or omitted from official archives, creating a layer of obfuscation that persists to this day. Several high-ranking officials later confirmed the presence of ex-Ahnenerbe documents within Porton-Down files. These include blueprints for delivery mechanisms, pathogen stabilization protocols, and coded reference sheets listing prior field experiments in occupied Poland. Redacted footnotes suggest that not all data was physically transferred, implying intentional destruction or concealment. Intelligence analysts reviewing these archives in the 1970s concluded that key material had been diverted to undisclosed locations, potentially influencing early Cold War biological research and counterintelligence programs. Public accounts of Porton Down during the 1950s typically focused on chemical weapons testing, but internal evidence points to a parallel, more insidious program. Project Mallard's operations, classified under multiple code layers, exemplify the lingering reach of Axis scientific knowledge into the Cold War period. Documentation gaps, redacted logs, and witness testimonies collectively indicate that significant experiments may never be fully reconstructed, leaving the true scope and consequence of Porton Down's post-war biological work shrouded in secrecy and ongoing historical investigation. Chapter 4: The Vatican Dossier, Operation Iron Cross. In the autumn of 1949, an unmarked courier delivered a sealed dossier to the Apostolic Palace, a bundle stamped with the insignia of the defunct Abwehr intelligence service. The microfilms within catalogued missing Nazi officers, many presumed dead at Nuremberg, alongside travel documents, forged visas, and Vatican transit records. The files referenced a covert operation labeled Operation Iron Cross, detailing a clandestine network that assisted SS personnel in evading post-war prosecution. According to the dossier, monasteries, hospitals, and Red Cross channels across Europe facilitated these extrications, often with the knowledge or tacit approval of certain ecclesiastical offices. Argentine naval records from 1950 corroborated some entries, though many passenger manifests had been deliberately erased, leaving significant gaps in official maritime logs. The intelligence contained within the microfilms was highly granular. Lists of officers included unit designations, previous postings in occupied territories, and post-war aliases. A codename index referenced transit routes through Genoa, Lisbon, and Buenos Aires, with specific instructions for asset management, safe houses, and financial transfers. Internal Vatican correspondence, later partially declassified, acknowledges that clerics in key dioceses maintained regular reporting on asset movements, a task described euphemistically as spiritual supervision of displaced persons. This suggests an organized effort to shield these individuals from prosecution. While preserving operational continuity, CR communications from the early 1950s, accessed under FOIA, reference the dossier as containing unrecoverable assets and indicate that US intelligence attempted discrete verification of multiple entries. The cables highlight a coordination challenge. Officials could neither fully confirm nor publicly acknowledge the existence of Operation Iron Cross without exposing ongoing extrication networks and jeopardizing relations with neutral nations. Analysts noted that some officers were integrated into emerging South American military and police structures, while others reportedly assumed new identities in North Africa and the Middle East. The meticulous records suggested an unprecedented intelligence coordination. Efforts spanning continents and bureaucracies, archival, photographs and microfilm scans reveal Vatican-issued transit documents with hand-signed stamps, often matching known Abwehr officer signatures. These included visa endorsements for Italy, Spain, and Portugal, facilitating the movement of personnel through ports under Allied observation. Microfilm notations identify clandestine meetings in Bern, Zurich, and Montevideo, with coded references to Project Argentinum and Sanctuary Protocol. These codenames appear in CIA and MI6 intercepts, though their full operational meaning remains classified. The interplay of ecclesiastical authority, intelligence networks, and ex-Nazi personnel demonstrates a complex web of post-war shadow operations, investigations conducted in 1971 by historians and intelligence operatives attempting to trace the dossier's subjects encountered profound obstacles. Every named cleric either disappeared from local records or was reassigned under a false identity. Surviving letters from the Secretariat indicate deliberate suppression of the files, noting phrases such as "withdrawn from public access" and "to remain confidential indefinitely." Subsequent declassification of certain Vatican documents in the 1980s confirmed redaction of key passages pertaining to transportation logistics, asset allocation, and identity reassignment procedures. Intelligence analysts surmise that the operation's longevity and secrecy were enabled by the Vatican's unique administrative autonomy and diplomatic protections. Eyewitness accounts from former Allied intelligence officers describe attempts to monitor these transit routes. Some observers noted convoys of unmarked vehicles, discrete railway shipments, and coordinated arrivals in South American ports. Operation Iron Cross reportedly involved counter-surveillance measures, including false manifests and decoy convoys, intended to mislead both local authorities and Allied intelligence. Intercepted communications suggest that the network occasionally interacted with emerging Cold War intelligence entities, with certain officers providing expertise to newly formed military units in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Further complicating the historical picture, portions of the dossier reference hidden caches of documents and assets in Austrian monasteries, Bavarian estates, and northern Italian villas. Post-war recovery attempts yielded only partial evidence, with some locations deliberately destroyed or erased from archives. A 1962 Vatican note states, "Inventory withdrawn under Secretariat order. Contents remain classified. Personnel files sealed." Analysts interpret this as confirmation that Operation Iron Cross continued well into the 1960s, with oversight limited to a small cadre of ecclesiastical and intelligence officials. The dossier's significance extends beyond tracking missing Nazi officers. Internal microfilms contain operational data on Axis clandestine networks, coded instructions for financial transfers, and procedural manuals for evading detection in Allied-controlled territories. Documents reference strategic coordination between multiple European transit points and highlight the efficacy of ecclesiastical channels in facilitating post-war movement of sensitive personnel. Cross-referencing these materials with declassified CIA, MI6, and Argentine intelligence files reveals a remarkable consistency, suggesting that the Vatican's role was central to a transcontinental exfiltration strategy. Operation Iron Cross exemplifies the entangled legacy of World War II intelligence, post-war geopolitics, and institutional secrecy. The dossier provides rare insight into the mechanisms by which Axis officers, feared criminals, and strategic assets survived the immediate aftermath of the war, often under the cover of legitimate humanitarian operations. Despite decades of research, many files, microfilms, and correspondence remain classified, and the full scope of Iron Cross continues to elude historical reconstruction. Its existence underscores the intricate web of covert cooperation, moral ambiguity, and bureaucratic suppression that characterize the transition from global conflict to Cold War realpolitik. Chapter 5. The Tunguska Directive. In 1958, decades after the infamous Tunguska explosion of 1908, Soviet geological teams operating in Krasnoyarsk Krai reported the discovery of metallic fragments with an isotopic composition that defied known terrestrial metallurgy. Initial analysis dismissed the material as anomalous meteorite residue, yet follow-up studies conducted in the laboratories of the Soviet Academy of Sciences suggested deliberate fabrication techniques predating known high-strength alloys. Classified KGB memos from 1959 referenced Directive 621B, a top-secret order mandating the complete suppression of all findings, the containment of foreign observers, and the immediate relocation of the fragments to undisclosed facilities. Analysts noted the unusual tone of the directive, stressing national security risk and containment priority level, extreme. Cross-referencing declassified Wehrmacht archives reveals that, in 1938, the Arne Nerbe Institute had dispatched exploratory expeditions to Siberia under Project Donar, aimed at studying unusual aerial phenomena and potential pre-war impact sites. Reports indicate that instruments and samples retrieved during these missions were intended to advance experimental propulsion and energy research. The fragments later discovered may have been remnants of these pre-war operations, inadvertently preserved in the permafrost and subsequently misidentified by Soviet geologists. Internal correspondence indicates that multiple foreign intelligence agencies, including early CIA reconnaissance units, were aware of these findings and initiated a joint monitoring effort to track material movement and personnel involvement. Lab reports describe unusual properties in the fragments: non-magnetic alloys, isotopic ratios inconsistent with Earth-based metallurgy, and evidence of high-energy exposure that could not be replicated by conventional furnaces. Photographs taken under polarized light and X-ray imaging show structural anomalies, including lattice formations indicative of advanced engineering. Notes in KGB files mention that the fragments were studied by select teams with expertise in both aerospace and nuclear material science, though the majority of reports were redacted to prevent exposure of sensitive research. Memos label the investigation as Tunguska Archive, status unknown, reflecting deliberate obfuscation in official records. Directive 621B. also ordered the removal of all personnel from public observation and mandated secrecy over related scientific publications. Soviet intelligence logs detail the use of isolated transport convoys, guarded rail shipments, and restricted area field testing to examine the fragments' physical and energetic characteristics. Several scientists involved in the analysis reportedly suffered health anomalies, including radiation burns, neurological disturbances, and unexplained respiratory symptoms. Declassified internal communications note that some team members were reassigned, while others vanished from the records entirely, raising questions about potential containment breaches or the deliberate elimination of witnesses. American intelligence sources obtained via Project Paperclip indicate that captured German scientists were intermittently consulted regarding the fragments, suggesting that pre-war Ahnenerbe knowledge had been transmitted through multiple post-war channels. Reports hint at a temporary joint Soviet-American research effort under the guise of atmospheric studies, where experts analyzed the fragments' composition, tested durability under high-velocity impact conditions, and attempted to reproduce anomalies in controlled environments. Correspondence includes references to possible non-terrestrial alloy and energy density beyond standard metallurgy. Though technical details remain redacted, analysts believe these experiments may have influenced early rocketry, aerospace design, and military propulsion concepts during the Cold War. Field diaries from Siberian expeditions provide additional context. Notably, a 1960 entry describes discovery of a partially buried capsule alongside the metallic fragments, with markings resembling pre-war German symbology and annotations in cryptic shorthand. The capsule was immediately transferred to a secure research facility, and no further mention appears in public Soviet documentation. Satellite imagery from 1962 shows unusual land disturbances in the collection area, potentially corresponding to excavation or testing sites. These operations were conducted under extreme secrecy, and local villagers reported unusual military activity, including unmarked convoys and armed perimeter patrols, which aligns with KGB directives regarding restricted zones. Subsequent Western intelligence debriefings in the 1970s reference sporadic data leaks regarding Tunguska fragments, including intercepted reports of unusual electromagnetic resonance and structural anomalies inconsistent with natural material. Analysts note that the combination of pre-war German experimentation, post-war Soviet containment, and early American interest created a complex web of clandestine research, difficult to disentangle even decades later. Surviving project documentation suggests that the fragments were continuously studied through the early 1960s, with a focus on energy applications, potential propulsion systems, and theoretical physics implications, though definitive conclusions remain elusive. The Tunguska Directive illustrates the intersection of historical mystery, post-war intelligence operations, and high-risk scientific experimentation. Directive 621B enforced strict secrecy, coordinated international oversight under covert agreements, and manipulated information channels to prevent public or adversary knowledge of the material's existence. Even now, while fragments may reside in archives or secure laboratories, the full extent of their composition, origin, and technological potential remains classified. The combination of suppressed records, displaced personnel, and fragmentary intelligence ensures that the Tunguska Directive persists as a haunting enigma in the annals of Cold War science and global intelligence operations. Decades after the final shots of World War II, shadows of forgotten operations, buried experiments, and vanished convoys linger across Europe, Siberia, and the high Arctic. Files remain sealed, microfilms unaccounted for, and signals intercepted long ago continue to haunt classified archives. The true extent of covert cooperation, the survival of Axis scientists, and the transnational movement of sensitive technology has never been fully reconstructed. As new declassifications emerge and satellite analyses refine our understanding, each revelation deepens the mystery, leaving historians and intelligence analysts to confront questions that may never be answered, and legacies that remain deliberately obscured from public view.